we mentioned clear cuts in that and oaks, and I feel like lots of people will associate those with just hill country. But a lot of this also applies to like ag country and stuff like that. So like Chris's comment earlier and your comment earlier, Alan, as far as like how long that the native browse will provide food for, like that 7-8 month time frame. A lot of people, and we kind of briefly talked about this before we started the podcast, but a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the native browse is coming up at the same time, before even the crops are planted in ag country. So that's like some of the first food sources that these deer are getting.
Yeah, I mean the woody browse, like if you have a stump sprout, and the stump sprout can come from a lot of ways. You can have a windstorm, you can have a fire, or you can go in there with a chainsaw and create a stump sprout. But the stump sprouts are happening, and the deer actually start feeding on the little buds right before they start to come out in the spring. They'll start feeding on those in January. It's really important up north, especially, that you don't do a lot of hack and squirt up there, because the woody browse is so imperative for the deer to survive on. Like that's how they get through the winter, is they're feeding on the little twigs, the little ends of trees, and it's up above the snow where they can actually reach. And that small little bud has a packet of nutrients in it. And that's how those northern deer even make it. Like if it wasn't for the stump sprouts, they would not survive.
Wow. Yeah, you're spot on with some of the areas I hunt in way northern Wisconsin. I mean, the deer, we used to joke that they only eat bark all year long. Yeah. I killed the buck up there that had like 8 pounds of moss in its stomach. And like it was just like, they just eat crazy stuff to make it through. But everything that is like young maple or anything like that, every single bud possible is eaten off. Every single one. It's crazy. I mean, we would marvel at one that actually has buds on. I remember I used to walk up there, and me and my brother were like, that's what that looks like when there's actually buds on these things. And just everything was just completely browsed down, because we probably found one or two oak trees in like 1,000 acres up there. And the rest of it's like conifers, maples, tamaracks, and swamp.
Yeah. And people in the South, like, they really don't realize, even if it's ag country, the stump sprouts are important. They're still browsing. They're browsing on that woody browse like 60% of their diet. And sometimes it's higher than that, even in ag country. Like my farm in West Alabama, it's heavy ag all the way around me. All of my neighbors around me manage the exact same way. They're all row croppers. They're just leasing my land to row crop. But where it makes a difference is where you put in your timber or your fields, and we're going to get into that first in just a second. But the amount of woody browse I see eating off like stump sprouts, even when they've got a giant field of corn or soybeans to be eating on, they're still preferring the stump sprouts.
It's funny because you can tell by looking at their droppings in the late season that it's like mega dry versus how it used to look, wet or runnier and patty kind, with a big buck laying a patty down or something. Sometimes it almost looks like it's, weeks or months old drought poop or something out west. And it's very interesting how that creates dry deer droppings, though.
Yeah. And that's a great point too. I hadn't even thought about talking about it, but this was like kind of leads into it. We're in a drought here right now, and I'm in a bad drought. We're just now starting to get rain, and it was the driest spring we ever had. We had a little bit of rain in May, and then it went just 100 degrees and dry. Well, I hung some cameras. I don't ever hang very many cameras in summer, but my wife's like, hey, get out there and hang some this year. I'm ready for you to get after it. And I said, okay. So I went and hung several cameras over some water holes. And I've hung cameras over these water holes in the wintertime, had great pictures of bucks on them. And my farm's really wet. And so I was like, man, it's a drought right now. I'm going to go hang these cameras on these water holes. Man, I ain't getting nothing, like a doe or two. But, in the wintertime, they're feeding on the woody browse and it doesn't have moisture in it. This time of year, even in a drought, the native habitat and even the soybeans and stuff like that, they're getting most of their moisture from those plants.
Yeah.
That's the most depressing thing in the world. When I started hunting Kentucky, it was all water holes. And I'm like, where in the hell are all these deer? They have to be thirsty. It's 95 degrees. Why are they not up here pounding water 6 times a day? This should be better than a corn pile. And I had it all figured out. I was going to kill a giant off of a water hole early season when it's like almost 100 degrees. Man. And then a couple years later, talk to gentlemen like yourself. And it actually started with a question about what's the cover crop people plant all the winter wheat.
Yeah, wheat.
And somebody said, oh yeah, go hit a winter wheat field and see what that's like. You know, a lot of the ag's gone, a lot of the browse is gone right now. They get a lot of their nutrients and water from that. And I was like, they get their water from plants. Holy crap.
Yes.
This explains so much.
I tried like explaining to people what that's, because like there's so many people when I was getting into hill country, a lot of guys at the local college would be like, you got to put, because a lot of them loved like their private land parcels. There'd be kids that get permission on like 2,000 acres out there. And like I was hunting public and they're like, dude, you got to find a way to get like a water hole on public or something like that. I'm like, man, I scout this time of year. Like I get up at 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, so I can scout and get to the place I want to hit before sunrise so that I can go to wrestling practice after that and then classes. And I was like saying, like, I cannot walk anywhere without getting absolutely soaking wet because of the dew. Like every morning, like clockwork. I mean, a deer could lick its fur and be hydrated for the day. Like there's so much water everywhere at that time. And that's, I mean, you think about how much more often you actually see deer in the early season when it's green like that out in fields in the morning. It's a stark contrast between when you've got more frost on and when you've got less, you know, moisture in the plants and in the things that they're feeding on.
Yeah, I've seen more deer at a water source when it is freezing cold, like 30 degrees, and than I ever have when it's 100. I mean, they're a lot better that time of year. You need some of the drought too. I was hunting in Tennessee last year. We was in a wicked drought, but I planted my food plots and caught good rain, and the deer were hammering the food plots morning and afternoon. But it is just like you said, they were seeking that moisture more so than they were the plant. That was the only thing that had any moisture in it at that time. There weren't any water holes or anything like that. It's all upland, but there was enough water in the plants that they were getting what they needed from that. So that's a huge key. If you're thinking about water, I like water holes around the rut. I like water holes, you know, in wintertime, but summertime, I've never killed a deer over a water hole.
Yeah. I think that's really good information. And I think it's like Chris said, like I was the same in Kentucky. Like I hung camp when I first went there, I hung cams on these water holes. I'm like, oh yeah, like it's hot, like definitely going to be a nice buck on this water hole. Like nothing. Hardly a doe. And of course, like in these areas, there were, at the time I didn't realize it, but just these grown up like native fields, like in multiple areas. Yeah. Now I'm like, well, no wonder I wasn't getting any deer on these, you know, water holes. But I feel like it's just not common knowledge, and people are just thinking, oh, it's hot, they want water, but they can get their water from other sources.
That's right.
And it's the opposite of what the majority of hunters know and go by. Again, you know, exhibit A here, like people, you would never in a million years say, oh yeah, we should hunt water in the winter.
Yeah.
That makes no sense until you dive into this, and then you're like, oh my God, I was an idiot.
It's what they're eating while they need the water in the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.